Try that again. Morning, everyone. That's more like it. All right. So thank you very much. So, my title is Learning with Learning Disability, and the with is important, hence the italics. So it's not from and it's not about, but it's with. And as we go along, I'll try to articulate what that means. And the subtitle is What Learning Disability Can Teach Us About Being Human. And throughout the book, of which this paper is a precursor, I'll be making the argument that learning disability is what Ian Hacking, RIP, called an organising concept. That's a concept which helps us make sense of what it means to be human, what it means to be a person, or indeed not to be a person. And so in this sense, we all live with and learn about ourselves and others through the very existence of a thing called learning disability. Now, when I first proposed this book, this quote is one of the first things that arrived in my mind. It's from Dan Goodley, who's sitting in the room and looking right at me. It says, maybe there's nothing more ableist in character than a sole academic banging on about the world. And as I say, this quote is one of the first things that came to mind as I proposed this book and started to sit down to write it. And so I'm going to give you an outline of the first chapter of the book, which I think is going to be the hardest to write. If there's nothing about us without us, how do I avoid becoming that ableist academic? How do I avoid becoming one of the tarmac professors that Mike Oliver railed against, rolling over disabled people solely in order to advance my own career? How do I write about my own relationship with disability and learning disability without being self-indulgent, self-justifying, patronising, boring? Moreover, how do I write about learning disability at length without reifying it as a thing which undoubtedly exists, when what we really know for sure is that it is merely a historically contingent, shape-shifting, unstable cultural construct? I'm not sure that I can, but I do want to address these troublesome questions by responding to calls from disability studies for scholars to state their relationship with disability, or in other words, the impact that it has had on them. So Simi Linton, for instance, in 2010, wrote this: I think that it is incumbent on non-disabled scholars to pay particular attention to issues of their own identity, their own privilege as non-disabled people, and the relationship of these factors to their scholarship. And Joan Corbett O'Toole, and I have to thank David Feeney, who's in the room, for pointing me to this paper, wrote something similar, criticising the fact that in disability studies, we don't talk about our relationships with disability. She said, in disability studies, we need to talk about our relationships with disability, because those relationships lead to valuable differences in experiences of disability and of ableism, and hence opportunities for reciprocal learning, for alliances, and for further theorising. Not disclosing shuts down such opportunities. And so I'm going to talk about my relationship with disability, because it is from that position that I'm going to try and make the case for learning with rather than from learning disability. I am a non-disabled disability studies scholar. For better or worse, I'm a white, middle-class, middle-aged British. Non-disabled disability studies scholar. But I do have relationships with disability and impairment. One of my children is autistic. One of my parents has been living with cancer for many years. One of my parents has experienced mental health issues in various ways for much of their life, including a spell in an institution in their early 20s. One of my partner's parents experiences dementia, which is progressing rapidly. My sister gets around on a combination of crutches and an electric wheelchair. And I work in a university department with colleagues both disabled and not. Not many people teach or research disability studies in the grand scheme of things, and so work in a department like mine. But I don't think my set of experiences and relationships are that unusual. And that brings me to the quote on the screen here, same but different. My sister lives in Cambodia, and I went to visit her at Easter. And this is a phrase you hear all over Thailand and Cambodia and Southeast Asia, same but different. It means similar, but not quite the same. And I'm kind of underscoring the fact that, I have my set of relationships with disability and impairment, and they're unique to me, but they're also, similar to lots of other people's. And the image is a cartoon that I have on my desk that my mum gave me many years ago. And it's of a bunch of penguins, a cartoon, a drawing of a bunch of penguins, and they're all balancing a tennis ball on their beak or their head. If you look carefully, they're all balancing them in slightly different ways. And the quote underneath is, "Remember you're unique," just like everybody else. Right? So it's that same idea that we have our similarities, but also we're all unique in our own ways. And Joan Corbett O'Toole was right. Until I wrote this and said it just now, my colleagues didn't know anything about my relationships with disability. They didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Were they worried about making me uncomfortable? I can't say. Did I have imposter syndrome? Definitely. But through stating my relationships to disability, I am hoping that as a non-disabled disability studies scholar, I can make a positive contribution to disability discourse and theory and be an ally for disabled people. I came to care about learning disability in particular serendipitously. I don't have any lived experience of learning disability, and as I've said, I embody many of the personal characteristics that generate privilege. What contact do I have with people with labels of learning disability? I mentioned that I have an autistic child. Although autism is commonly defined as a learning disability, my child does not see themselves as learning disabled. Academically, they do very well, currently planning to study biomedical engineering at university with a view to specialise in prosthetics, another way in which disability threads itself through our lives. My child finds some social and emotional things tricky, but has a good circle of close friends, has a weekend job that involves a lot of interaction with the public, and is beginning to go to festivals and big concerts, driving themselves and their friends. So it's difficult to characterise my child as having a learning disability, despite what the diagnostic manuals, codes of practice, and charities say. The realisation that I came to care about learning disability came from elsewhere. It has its origins in study support work that I did in the early 2000s at Liverpool Community College as a friend's suggestion, as a way of funding myself through a master's degree in popular music, rather than any predisposition towards caring for learning disability or learning disabled people. My friend, who incidentally has a 30-year-old diagnosis of bipolar disorder, another way in which disability threads itself through our lives, suggested I apply because they thought I had a suitable disposition. I worked with many disabled students for many years, mainly with students with labels of specific learning difficulties, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and so on. And to cut a long story short, that experience led to a teaching qualification, or a set of them, and ultimately a doctorate in education. And for my thesis, I facilitated a participatory project around dyslexic sixth form students' use of Facebook for literacy and learning, which ultimately helped persuade their college to change its social media policy. So social media is not all bad, right? And this project was largely motivated by my discomfort around the pervasive deficit discourse around dyslexia, as well as persistent moral panics around technology and teenagers. That ultimately led me to this job at Liverpool Hope and to the CCDS, where I began first to research the history of learning disability, initially through archival methods and then through participatory methods. And that brings me to the central project of this book. Learning with learning disability through research. And there's a definition of research on the screen here. Research is like finding pieces of a jigsaw. It's looking over and over again. Because sometimes you look at something once, but you don't see the full picture. But when you come back and look at it again, you'll see something different. And the more times you go backward and forward to it, the more you see. So that's good. So the definition comes from an article written by Tina Cook and Pam Inglis, two highly regarded researchers of learning disability, but these are not their words. The quote comes from a participant in one of their research projects, in fact, from a man with a learning disability who was in a secure unit in a hospital. I like it, and I include it here because it encapsulates the nature of research concisely and as well as any definition in a methodological textbook. Firstly, its iterative nature, the need to move back and forth across the object under investigation or construction until you see something different. Secondly, the need to stand back from the object in order to see the full picture. We might conceive of this picture, the full picture, as representing some kind of truth about the object of interest and its place in the world. And of course, another way to define research is as a search for truth. This search for truth is not to be confused with a search for objectivity. As Tim Ingold has argued, and I have to thank Professor Penketh for giving me his book, what we regard as truth reflects our participation in the world. And as Nick Peam has argued, our knowledge and our quest for more of it cannot be detached from all the background knowledge, understanding, ways of seeing, and sense of purpose that we bring, consciously or subconsciously, to bear on our investigation.
Just 2 minutes there.
Yep. I've just talked about two authors who are not disability studies scholars. Tim Ingold is an anthropologist, Nick Peam is a philosopher of education. I've included them because I think it's important that we look outside disability studies if we are to keep it vital and increase its reach. One of the things I find interesting about Nick Peam's work is his contention that scholars should objectify their subjectivity, i.e., acknowledge the ways in which our subjective experiences shape the way we apprehend and interpret the things we research. This is an echo of the call from disability studies to state our relationships with disability. Both Peam and Ingold write compellingly about the way we research things that we care about or have an attachment to. This care is a kind of commitment to the things we investigate, things we are caught up in our everyday lives. Both write engaging with what Ingold calls real problems and Peam calls useful trouble. Issues that have no conclusive solutions, but afford opportunities to see things anew. Learning disability is a real problem. It is useful trouble because it can help us understand our relationships with each other, personhood, and the world. And Tim Ingold writes beautifully about education as a means of attending to the world, bringing us into correspondence with the world. Etymologically, education means to lead out, while attend means to stretch towards, from the Latin ad, toward, tendere, stretch. And to correspond means to co-respond, to answer to one another and go along together. And so my intention in this book is to attend to and correspond with learning disability, to stretch reflexively towards it and to keep it present in our considerations of what it means to be human, so that we can all, learning disabled and not, go along better together. This is what it means to learn with, not about or from learning disability. Withness, Ingold says, saves the other from objectification by bringing it alongside as a companion or accomplice. It turns othering into togethering. Thank you.